Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar in this series, Transition to Employment. We're happy to have you today. My name is Wendy Parent-Johnson, and I am the Executive Director of the Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities at the University of Arizona. And we're pleased to have you today. If you were able to attend the first webinar, that one was addressing employment ahead, giving you space to lead. The second one is about collaborative relationships, promoting transition capable youth. And our next webinar will be career outcomes, taking action together. So we hope you can join us again for that one as well next month. So I'm happy to turn this over to our speaker today, Richard Parent-Johnson. Richard?
Hi, good afternoon. We appreciate you joining us in this second webinar. Today, as Wendy mentioned, this is about collaborative relationships and promoting transition-capable youth. This is something that we both have been involved in this particular subject of transition in sort of a generic way for a decade or more. So we're happy to share with you the things that we have learned in particular about transitions in general, and then we'll talk about some specific examples, transitions for emerging adults. So I'm going to begin by just giving you three really important, what I think are important themes. Let's go back to the previous slide. Yeah. First, this transition is like any transition is complex, but this one is particularly complex as young adults leave high school or get ready to leave high school and become more independent in whatever that means to them. It's complex and it involves nearly every aspect of a person's life, including their relationships with their families. And quite honestly, including their family's relationship with them. There is a lot of anxiety on everybody's part in this period of time. So in that sense, when I talk about it being exceptionally complex, what I mean is that there is a total impact. Everything is involved with the young person's experience at this time and their families. School, employment, independent living, healthcare, almost social relationships, almost everything you can think of in a person's life as they shift from high school into whatever is beyond that. As I've said, at best, it's unsettling for families as well. They don't feel well informed about the changing services and resources available to them in the future. Sometimes not even particularly well informed about the resources and services available to them now, at this point, before their young adult has actually left high school. They also are uncertain about how to help teach and support their children in this transition. That's one theme. Okay, the second theme is all right. These are holistic transitions and are seldom, and this is an important theme, and we're going to elaborate on this in more detail in the next section of my presentation here. These are holistic transition, and they're seldom successfully addressed and supported by addressing those individual complex needs in separate and specific services and organizational-based ways. Rather, what we're proposing, what I'm going to talk about, is something that is much more collaborative, an effort that's more team-approached, that actually integrates the best of what schools and agencies and organizations and anyone more formally involved in this transition period into a more individualized response for the young adult that supports and grows them in their strengths, their interests, and their goals, which means they need to also learn how to identify and articulate those strengths, interests, and goals. Now, the third thing and the last thing that we're going to spend some time on is this one, and it seems pretty obvious, but sometimes professionals in all settings and family members sort of forget this. This is the kid's life. It is and must be their transition. For them to be successful, they need to be engaged. They need to act. They need to learn how to be engaged, become engaged, and how to act in whatever capacity that they're required. In particular, they need to see themselves as capable of making this transition happen. Our job in any of these professional capacities I've sort of glossed over, run through, is to create those kinds of opportunities for them to see themselves as capable, to teach them the skills and the lessons they need to experience and see themselves as capable young adults. All right, so how do we address this? There are 3 or 4 things that in particular I've gleaned out of the decades-long experiences that I think are really valuable and important to share. Let's start that. We'll begin with the next slide. We're proposing, and I've talked about this for some time now in all kinds of capacities, is that we find a way to move from the traditional handoff model where the young person goes from, is involved in school and their family is always in the background, sometimes more in the foreground than others. The student has their teacher. Then in some systems, this is just an example of the way there's sort of a set of organizations and services individually involved in this young person's life. So they have a teacher, they have a transition specialist, they have a voc rehab counselor, they have a job coach, and those kinds of activities that address their needs are met in different services. And there's often a considerable lack of consistency and continuity as someone moves. There are gaps in the change or in the handoffs. And that's problematic for the kid and for those of us who are the professionals. So what I'm suggesting is that we move from this handoff model to a much more collaborative, team-based model, where the teacher, the voc rehab counselor, using the categories I used on the left, are now involved. And I sort of hate that this is a box, but that's the way I could graphically represent it. The teacher, the voc rehab counselor, the individual student, and now family, trying to emphasize their role in all of this because they're the default coordinator in many instances for this young person's making this transition. The transition specialist, the job coach, and if you don't see yourself in one of those areas, put yourself in there, because that's how you can begin to operationalize what I'm talking about in your own professional experiences. So we need to move from that handoff model to a collaborative team model. Now, some key aspects, and there's a body of work called collective impact theory and practice that we relied on some years back to begin to understand what it means to bring people together in a much more collaborative, genuinely collaborative way, which is not cooperation, it is collaboration. So what's required there? A collaborative team is created around the idea of looking for ways to collectively impact an issue. Whatever issue you want to fill in there, you're trying to bring together people who are going to look for ways that they can work together so that the collective has the impact and the outcome that you all of us desire, including the family and the young person. So one way we've begun this, and Wendy's going to talk a little bit about this in later in the afternoon, just let's say beginning. And this is really where one of our first collaborative team efforts began, reaching out to 1 or 2 other professionals from organizations or agencies outside or your own, or in this case, my own, to explore the possible common issues or concerns. And then just see if we've got some common ground that we might begin to have a conversation about how can we work together such that we have a collective impact on the overall outcome here that each of us are working on. So in the instances that we're talking about today, it's how do we, the question becomes, if you bring people together around this theme of transition, how do we as a team, where you identify as a small to growing team, how do we collectively impact the successful transition of young emerging adults, in our case with disabling conditions, from high school to employment? Now, there are other kinds of, you can define transition from and to in any way you choose, but this is the one we're working from today. Then the issue becomes, and this is where there's often a breakdown, people assume that they all understand what they mean by successful transition and the direction that they're heading. So the issue often really needs to be to spend the time together, these first initial conversations, this nascent team, if you will, together. You have to define what you in common see as the problem, and consider and try and operationalize, at least in writing, a set of actions, initial set of actions and activities that you think you could together address. And when I say initial set of actions and activities, I really mean that, because the real world will force you, if you're paying attention anyway, and I'm sure you will be, to sort of iteratively design what emerges yourself or yourselves out of this conversation, and things you might say, well, to do the things we really want, we need to engage another professional or another organization. So you need to initially design and list a set of actions and activities that you're going to address. And then another key thing is, in this process, I think it is particularly important that you find and create opportunities for the team members, and I'm just talking about the organizational people, the professionals here, to participate in some of these activities together, because then your understanding of one another's roles in your individual organizations will be much more clear, and you can begin to figure out how you can work better together across those organizations and across those styles of work. So you need to find some ways, not just to assign people to do some things, but to do some things together, which means you also need to define individual roles and responsibilities, and what those might be is beyond the conversation today. But you need to try and get some of that very clear. Who's going to do what, when, and how. And then, and again, this is said as sort of a generalization, decide what you think success is going to look like, or at least progress toward the success is going to look like, and begin to think about, well, how will we know it? When I say how to measure it, I don't mean it measuring it quantitatively. I mean to understand, are the people, the young people you're working with, do they feel like, do you see them moving forward in their transition? Does the family, for example, are they satisfied with what they're seeing and their level of participation in this thing? Those kinds of things is what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to give two examples of collaborative teams that I've participated in. This one is called Soaring to New Heights. It's the first example of a collaborative team that was built in order to find collective ways to impact the successful transition of high school kids. These are, in this particular team, it was juniors in high school, to begin to move them consciously, purposefully from high school to employment. And this project was titled Soaring to New Heights. It was a 3-year project that was funded primarily by the Kansas Rehabilitation Services. And it brought together initially, and we added people along the way. 3 years is a long time. You need to add people as you go, as you see are appropriate. We brought together a small team of special ed researchers, and one of those was me, high school district administrators, and that's an important feature, voc rehab counselors, and high school special ed teachers. So we had support from multiple directions, and that's why I made sure to include the high school district level administrators. These people knew what we were going on. They were invested in this process, sitting down with Kansas Rehab Services, our research team, the counselors who worked in voc rehab, the voc rehab staff, because that's where Kansas Rehabilitation Services came in, and the high school students, or teachers rather. We brought together that group. And so we had a multi-directional, multi-level commitment that we put into practice across time. So our goal was to build, write, and implement a semester-long employability curriculum, I put that in quotes, for high school juniors. And we started with a well-researched set of concepts that evolve or revolve around this concept of self-determination. It's been around for decades, this notion of how do you teach self-determination? And that we try to then put that into a course, a class, a semester-long class that would improve the transition from high school to work for these students, or at least their sense that it was improving. Okay, now, rather than go into lots of detail, because that's not the purpose of today's setting either, I'm going to give you some significant Soaring team developments. The team members who were special ed teachers, voc rehab counselors, now it's recognized that special ed teachers and voc rehab counselors, as well as the special ed staff, spent a year developing and piloting an exceptional, what I've been called an exceptional course, with a much debated and tested scope and sequence of lessons, again, based on self-determination. We started early, we started in the summer, so we were only about 2 months ahead of the course itself in terms of how we were building it. We were looking at how it was working as we built the next set of lessons. So, and then we moved some things around based on what initially we thought would work and then didn't work. So this is a very iteratively designed activity. So I'm going to reemphasize that the shared experience between the teachers and the voc rehab counselors in particular, who are part of this process and also teaching. Now, I don't mean full-time, I just mean going into the classroom periodically, but systematically with the teacher and the students. These were classes of 10 students per teacher for the semester. What we learned about that, and this is why I emphasize this sharing of the experience, is that teachers and voc rehab counselors emerged with a completely new understanding and appreciation for one another's work in this area. Both groups said they became better at their own work. Both groups learned because they were in the classroom or they went to the voc rehab, they worked together, agency and offices, and they began to understand what the common held agenda was really going to look like. Now, that sounds great, and it was up to a point. At the end of the first year, the course did not meet our expectations. The students did not demonstrate any significant, randomly and intermittently, they experienced and demonstrated some improvement in their quote unquote self-determination or employability, what they were hoping for and looking for in the future and what we were hoping with them. So the big point, so we had to not go back to square one, but we had to rethink what is missing here, what seems to be the struggle with the students in this course. So you'll see the bottom line is that mistakenly, we had assumed a level of self-efficacy that most, maybe not all, but most, the vast majority of these students simply did not have. We made that as an operating assumption for the whole course. We're going to teach self-determination skills, decision-making, goal setting, self-advocacy, and much more, everything that falls under the rubric of self-determination. So we assumed a reasonable level of self-efficacy that the students didn't have. Now, When I talk about that, self-efficacy can be understood as a personal sense of being of oneself, as being capable of actually doing what is expected of you to do. So if you're asked to be a self-advocate, do you believe you can do that? You can teach somebody those skills, but they don't, or the set, you can have them in the class or the goal setting or the decision making. But if they really don't see themselves as a capable person with their own ideas, their own voice, they're simply not ready to actually learn and practice the self-determination skills we were teaching. So again, we'd assumed that they had that level of self-efficacy, that sense of themselves as being capable of doing the different tasks that we put in front of them. And that simply was not true in a strong way. So the next several months after the first semester, we had the next summer because it took us that long to then begin to add things that we thought, we designed things we'd hoped at least would deal effectively with helping students see themselves as capable. And I'll share some of the results of that work here in a minute, the lessons and the kinds of activities. Now, a much more recent example of building a collaborative team in order to create collective impact ways to help kids succeed in successful transition from high school employment or just emerge as an adult on the other, more independent on the other side of high school, is a project currently operating in its really, I think, significantly improved form. It's a project that was started in the University of South Dakota when Wendy Johnson and I and a couple of others were working there in the med school. This project is called the Transition Ahead Roundtable. It's an ongoing project currently and funded through the Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities. And it brings a team. It's also funded by agencies or another agency Wendy will speak to later briefly, or at least identify. This brings together a team of transition specialists, a peer mentor, educational, medical, and rehabilitation and adult service providers, and experienced consultants to do what? To put together a collaborative team for a day-long set of activities that we think, through the experience we've had previously in other kinds of transition activities like the Soaring to New Heights program, we think will work in a broader sense of not just employability, but helping these young kids transition into adulthood, including, and in particular, including the concept of employment. So let's look at that next slide. This is a flyer that we send out, or that is available to parents and counselors in all the agencies that we're working with, that describes the Transition Ahead Roundtable. Now, I want to make it clear that one of the themes that emerge from all the kinds of things that I've been talking about, helping the young person see themselves as capable, is that we spend much of the full day that we spend together with a young person and their family members, at least one family member, helping them see that they are at the roundtable. We are not talking to them. Their parents aren't talking to them. They are with us as a colleague of sorts to explore their own future. We ask them questions, we engage them in multiple ways that we'll talk briefly about throughout the day to get them to begin to participate, which is in many, many contexts, often the first time they have been engaged where people listen to them and they are compelled, because of the activities we do, to be the active participant. And we start out telling them this is what this day is about. It's a day-long experience focused on them, on exploring who they are, their own strengths, their own interests, and dreams, aspirations, however vague they may be, for their own future. because we want to help them create a more personalized, individualized sense of that future. So we're trying to build what you can see here is a transition with confidence, with a sense of themselves as capable. And this is just a day-long activity. Some of the activities involve both parent and young adult at the same time. Other times, the day's activities, the team, different members of the team play different roles throughout the day, and engaging the parent separate from the young adult. But periodically and systematically, we come back together, particularly at the end of the day. So this is young adults between 14 and 21. That's the group. And you can see the areas of life that we're addressing at this roundtable are employment, healthcare, overall wellness, education and post-secondary education activities, self-advocacy, leadership, the concept of trying to get them to lead or participate at least actively into that day's activities, community connections, where can they connect in the future, beyond the space that they're operating in now, which is typically very limited in terms of their relationships and the works, their school setting. Is it school and home? That's primarily the context that they have so their community is pretty limited, and they get to explore other possibilities. And then independent living. Now, I'm going to step back a moment into the kinds of tools and strategies that we have found to be, and I wouldn't have spent the time to talk with you, except that these are, I think, critical pieces that can be implemented in a whole variety of ways, depending on whatever your professional role is, for teaching the kinds of strategies that give kids a voice, that engages them in a way that they begin to see that they are in fact capable. So a couple of these, some that are more easily operationalized than others, but it happens in all kinds of contexts. A couple of teaching strategies, modeling, and probably you have heard something like this, but what that means, and a parent can do this, the teacher can do this, depending on whatever skill or activity. It could be budgeting at home, it could be cooking, it could be any activity you're trying to help them learn how to do. Modeling is to demonstrate a skill while you think out loud. So you're saying, okay, I forgot this piece, I better. And so as you're demonstrating, you doing whatever activity it is, figuring out your today to-do list, think out loud, just let them observe what's going on in your mind as you say, all right, today I need to do this, this, and this. And oh, I forgot that. And maybe I better now, what's my priority here? So think that kind of activity out loud and get that young person to see that this stuff happen magically. There is a thought process behind every skill or activity that people do. And it doesn't have to be complex. They just need the modeling, which isn't just to show, it's the show while you are thinking out loud what you're thinking and doing as you do those kinds of things. Another thing that is very common in life, but is giving kids feedback, giving them, we'll call it feedback, critique, direction, whatever you want to go. But here's what I want to talk about, elaborated, and this is just a succinct version of elaborated feedback. And this is something that the Center for Research on Learning at the University of Kansas is quite effective in teaching people how to do, as well as modeling activities as well. So those sort of came from our experience at the Center for Research on Learning in the School of Education at KU. Elaborated feedback has got these 5 components. Simple once you get the hang of it. You need to sit down with somebody and give them one-on-one feedback. If you're in a classroom or a group setting, you still need to do this one-on-one. You need to give them 3. Okay, hedge a little if you cannot come up with 3, give them 2. But the suggestion here is 3 positive statements about the student's performance. So that's what elaborated feedback starts with: one-on-one meeting, and he offers 3 positive statements about their performance, whatever it is you're talking about for the day. And then the positive elaborated feedback also identifies the type of errors that the student has made as you're giving them feedback about their performance, whatever that is. Then you give examples, or at least one example of what a correct performance would look like. And then this is actually kind of more important than a lot of people consider. Have elaborated feedback. The last step is to have the student repeat back what he or she just heard. Now, they're going to stumble and fall and leave pieces out, and that's okay. They'll get better as you and they practice this kind of elite feedback process. And it also helps them see their successes. It helps them see that they are capable and learn where there are gaps in their capability. And that's an important dynamic for them to recognize and participate in. All right, here's an example. Now, a couple of other things. I'm going to give you some other tools. These are, again, these are tools that we find ways to use in all of our activities that we're doing, like particularly in our Transition Ahead Roundtable. We use things that are quite visual. This is an acronym called FACTS. It was part of the Soaring to New Heights curriculum. In fact, some of the teachers had this laminated as a 3 by or 2.5 by 3.5 poster in their room because it became such a valuable asset to their classroom activities. What is good? Having a good this is sort of a conversation. It started out as how would you behave in an interview, but it became how do you behave when you're trying to communicate with others around you. And we use these more universally designed icons to try and connect with kids who aren't particularly strong in their reading skills. So we gave them the images of what it means to face a person. So facts: face the person, activate eye contact, check expression, talk clearly, stay calm. We practice them. The teachers practice this in lots of different contexts. And in particular, one that was very useful to the students is that once they learn how to interact, let's say they were doing a mock interview process, and this was really an important strategy that we all took note of as the teachers in these classrooms. We put them into mock interview settings. And after they'd learn, okay, when you sit down, so we put 2 students together and we give the first student became the interviewer and the second student was the interviewee. And then there was a third student who watched the interviewee, did with a little checklist, did as they're being interviewed, did Johnny, who was being interviewed by Sally, did Johnny face her? Did Johnny activate eye contact with Sally? Did Johnny check, did he recognize the own expressions on his face? Did he talk clearly? And did he stay calm? So while Johnny's trying to learn to do those things, there's a third person, another student, observing. So they get to see that person in their own struggle to learn these activities. And then they can shift into now they can sit down and be the person who's trying to do that correctly. So they learn what a good conversation, a good interview looks like, because they're the observer on the outside looking at this. We even put them into the role of being the interviewer so they can begin to think about, well, what's it like to be on the other side of the table in these conversations? So we have another version of this. We learned a lot from that particular communication tool. And then in our healthcare conversation with young adults, we took that same set of questions and we created, this is several years later in our Transition Ahead Town Roundtable, and even in the clinic that we were running in the University of South Dakota, same kind of concept. This is now Doc Talk. Be relaxed. And we had some 14, 15-year-olds help us create this this, we call it a doc card. It's actually a laminated 3x5 card. With the front side is the talking with your doctor, and it's got to be relaxed, face the person, make eye contact, and ask your questions. So we simplified it a little bit because we're trying to get them to engage their doctor and have things to ask. So then the flip side is examples of, well, if I'm an asthmatic, if I'm a young person, or am I diabetic, how does that really affect my eating? So these are sample questions that we provide them to begin to think about how can they participate with their doctor in an important conversation. It's all part of getting them to begin to have a voice and to use it. Another skill and tool that gets used frequently in all of these settings that we've been talking about. I actually stole this from Wendy years ago and used it in the Soaring curriculum, and it's stuck there ever since in all the work that we do. Because kids need to learn, these young adults need to learn to make decisions. They need to learn to make choices, recognize the pros and the cons of different settings, of different issues. Could be a workplace setting. It could be people they don't like or do like. Why? Job duties. So if they go out on a particular job or doing maybe a situational assessment, we ask them, which they do 3 situational assessments in our Soaring Ahead Roundtable during the day. And we ask them to use this tool, the 3 work settings that you participated in. Which of those did you like? First one, second one, third one. What did you like about this one? What did you dislike about the second one? We get them to think about those things and to express it in however basic a way. If they just want to say, circle the liked, okay, or didn't like, the idea would be great if they could say, well, why did you like it? Or why didn't you like it? Or what was just okay about it? And then we ask a couple more pointed questions. Would you like to work there? Would you like to do this kind of activity? They learn then that they can think like that they can begin to look at what's good and what's not so good and why. And then they begin to think about, well, and then we encourage them to think that they can choose. We also do some really interesting things that represent to them at the end of the day, as visually as we can, and there are other examples we'll share in a second. This is a work-based learning experience resume. And you've seen this before. We made a brief reference to it last time in the previous webinar. The thing I like about this tool, this is a full 8.5 by 11 sheet, and the young person gets this after they've done their situational assessments as part of their Transition Ahead Roundtable day from 8:45 until 3:15 with a lunch break and a couple of others. But at the end of the day, they get this from us. So we observed how they, not could they do the job or not, but what were their strengths in doing these jobs, what worked for them. So we share our feedback to them in a specific, concrete, hopefully visually interesting to them way, what our observations were. And as you can see, and we don't, these boxes change depending on the young person individually. So this is just a template. This happens to give particular reference to an anonymous young adult that we worked with, but these all get explored or at least observed and expressed, articulated to them in this tool. We share it with them at the end of the day, not the tool per se, but what's on there, and then we put it into this tool for them to have at a later point. Overall, the observations were that they're capable. You know, you notice that first sentence in observations is, Johnny, you are capable of, and then we fill it in. So we're trying to get kids to share what they want, what they, and to develop a more concrete sense of themselves. And we provide the kinds of tools that you're seeing and the kinds of practices that I made reference to do that, because our focus is to help them get their own voice. Then they can become decision makers. Then they can be a self-advocate. If they have something and believe in it and recognize it in themselves, that's what they use when we talk about self-advocacy skills. When they see that they have some goals, that's when they can turn the goals that they have into a goal worksheet, or the kinds of skills we started out way back when, teaching them to do, thinking they believed that they could do it. And then opportunities is a huge concept in this whole process. You have to give them, create for them consistent opportunities and new opportunities to practice whatever skill set you're trying to work with, whether you're the parent, the teacher, the voc rehab counselor, anyone, or the employer, opportunities to practice these kinds of things, the things that you want them to grow into. All right. At the end of the day, and this was also shown briefly last week, or first webinar, they tell us, we put them on the spot at the end of the day, and we sort of ease them into recognizing that this is going to be their conversation they're going to lead. We're as a team meeting, and there are anywhere from 5 to 8 of us in this Zoom team meeting at the end of the day. And we fill in the blanks. So this is a template that they use, and one of our colleagues has this conversation. What do you think? Now, what do you think your strengths are today? At the end of the day, you've talked and worked with us, and we've listened to you. And so we're listening and sometimes evoking responses that we think are right on the tip of our tongue. We give them the space to fill this in. Here are my strengths. Well, what are your interests? Here are my interests. What then? You've talked about all these strengths and interests. Do you have any goals that are sort of percolated up as a result of all these dialogues you've had today? They list goals, and they share this is all collected. And at the end of the day, the team many of the members of the people that they've seen today come together and listen. This only takes 3 or 4 minutes to say out loud, but that is many times, the first time they've ever led a meeting, that they've ever become an equal at the table. The last thing we ask them that they have to show, and it's fine that we moved to this is a different example, same template. The last thing beyond strengths, interests, goals is supports. And we don't say what we're going to support. We say, what do you need? We ask them, what do you need? What do you want to ask this team that is gathered with you all day long? What do you want from them? So you need to try and at least, this is a pretty expressive young person here. Cook healthy, learn practice job skills, remind me to ask friends to do something out of school, give me driving lessons. They're asking for help. And that's often a huge step for them as well. All important stuff. One other exciting and fun thing that they get provided most times, depending on the technology involved and where people are actually doing their staff session, is the Transition Ahead Roundtable Vision Board. And so one of our staff members puts this together as they listen to the young person articulate what it is that their strengths and their goals might be. So, and this one's a pretty busy one, but we give them, this is the takeaway from the end of the day, because visual cues about what they actually said are going to stick a lot better than some of the conversations and some of the language and some of the statements they made during the day. They can stick this up on the wall at home, their parent, and by the way, when they are making this presentation, the parent is sitting there. The parent is the listener, and listening to their young person give voice to many, many times things they have never heard. And it's quite an experience to be there at the end of the day. So one more, I think those are my examples. There may be a second. Yeah. So this is a quick thing, and Wendy will take over from here. And nice to have your time for a little while, and we'll let Wendy Parent-Johnson go from here.
Thank you, Richard. That was such great information. I'm going to add a little bit to it and demonstrate some of the ways that we have applied this at the actual school community setting. So when we think about youth, they need the opportunities. They have to have the experiences, as Richard said, so that they can explore those careers and see what they might like. What do they want to do? And what types of environments do they like? And what choices do they want? And how do they develop skills and demonstrate those competencies if we don't provide the opportunities for them to do that? And so often we see decisions made that this person can't because. So let's move beyond that, because everybody needs these. So we need to create those opportunities, allow individuals to be able to have the experiences to set their goals, to advocate for themselves, and to be able to share these things with others. The information, they have to have the information to share. And so often I'll be in an experience with a school or a young adult, and somebody will say, well, they have an unrealistic goal. They want to do this. Well, we haven't maybe given them the opportunity to explore those things. And I think this is best communicated by one of our students. I'm going to play this video. It's very short on Nevia. So let me.
My name is Nivea. I am a member of the 2021 graduation class from Robert Kirby High School. Now that I have graduated, I want to be an artist for my interest because for the last few months, I have been making social media posts and other aircraft as part of the work-based learning experiment. What I like most about my work-based learning experience was learning graphic design and Canva and working with my supervisor, Jeff. What I am most excited about for the summer work program is being able to work more hours and earning money for the work I do.
So as you can see, by having this experience, Navia had some new thoughts about what she wanted to do after leaving school, because it opened up doors. And we hear this all the time from youth saying, oh, I want to do this. Okay, so if we're in a school environment, school community, thinking about how do we bring in the partners to be able to create these work experiences? That we know is one of the best ways for youth to gain these experiences that we're talking about, to allow them to demonstrate their skills, develop their skills, make choices, and think about the careers and the opportunities they want to experience after they leave school. And so often we hear that a school does not have access to a certain adult service or to enough staff or to the ability to be able to go out in the community. And so thinking about how can you make this happen? You as one single person, the teacher, the transition specialist, someone of that within that school environment. And what we have found to be really helpful is if you begin initiating those relationships, reach out, start getting to know each other, find out about their perspective, as Richard mentioned, learn from each other and see what is it that you can do together. Be that champion. We did a large scale study in Arizona with close to 200 participants that work in some capacity in transition. The percentage of students that were actually leaving school for employment and employment or college was incredibly low. And with all of these, we saw, in a general sense, low, poor outcomes, but we saw pockets of excellence in different communities. And what was repeatedly said over and over by these individuals was, we had an informal or a formal network, some way they came together in that local community, and they had a champion, someone that brought them together, someone that kept the meetings going, did not just let it drop, because it can happen sometimes when everybody gets busy and things fall through the cracks, particularly if you don't have a specific agenda or reason for meeting other than coming together, building that partnership and feeling, how can we make these experiences happen for the youth in our school systems? As Richard had mentioned with some of the specific examples that he talked about with the collaborative teams. I think one of the things we found to be most helpful is just get started. We can sit there forever and say, well, we don't have this isn't happening. Let's make something happen. One student, one work experience. Let's begin, one employer. And we've done that with a lot of schools as they're beginning to develop their programs. That's all that they can do. And then they can find out where the gaps are and what they need to be able to expand. So that's okay. We learn from that. And that student gets to share what they learned and help us shape what it is that we're creating. I think one of the things I hear all the time, and is probably makes people freeze a little bit, is that this is what we always do, or the word on the street, they can't do it. Somebody won't participate. There is no funding, there is not that. And so I suggest and challenge you to move beyond that, because what we've found is as we bring these partnerships together and work together, we can share our resources, we can share our staffing, we can problem solve together. It's not as challenging when we can do it with a group of people, and we can make things happen that we had not thought about. We can look at things differently, and we can make those things happen. A perfect example was when COVID came. We had students out in rural areas, could not get to job sites because they were locked down at the school and working remotely. We didn't want students to fall behind in this area. So we created virtual job development, virtual work experiences, and virtual job coaching support so that participants had those opportunities to still engage and gain the experiences they need to move forward in planning their future. And tell the stories, like Navia did. Share those with your different partners, the partners that aren't on board yet, the families, the individuals, so that people do want to come on board, not just the stories, but those journeys. And I've got the balls here of some of the key partners to include: folk rehab, vocational rehabilitation, and providers. But there's certainly more, and they're going to be unique to your community. And one could be the University Center for Excellence in Disabilities, such as ourselves. So here's an example of a flow chart that kind of illustrates the outcome that was created as a result of the collaborative partnership at a local community. And through this, the student is starting their journey. The school referral, which did not happen before, now includes referral for students to community colleges, to the community college in that community, the state VR, tribal vocational rehabilitation, and the Sonoran Center. These have been opened up more opportunities, and through multiple funding sources that have come together, we have been able to provide multiple experiences as model services and building capacity in the state. We lead Project Search, which some of you all may know, which is an internship experience, often at a hospital and sometimes other settings, looking at summer work, as we've been talking about, that our state vocational rehabilitation agency funds the wages for students to participate. Work-based learning, as we've been talking about, and the Roundtable, as Richard mentioned. As a result of some of those summer work and work-based learning experiences, students are getting jobs while they're still in school or right when they graduate. And so then coming together and providing that follow-up support. So what I think is critical to think about is that these things are happening because Staff are coming together across the different agencies, and they're also pooling their resources and braiding the funds together to be able to support students in these different capacities. So we also need to create the experiences, as Richard mentioned, for students to share and lead. We think about practicing work experiences, but they also need these opportunities in a very purposeful way. So when we think about different ways that we have found, and there's going to be others that you can add to this list, the work-based learning resume that we shared, a video like Navia did, a vision board, the planner, those were all some templates that are proven formats that youth have enjoyed using and have been very effective. And so what are some of the venues that they can practice these things? Let them lead their IEP, their individualized education planning meeting. Let them lead. We've had some students that talk to their classroom and of their fellow students to share what was in those documents for themselves. We also hold a work-based learning job group run by peers that they meet weekly, where they can share these things, they can learn about things, they can ask questions among themselves, among the rest of the students that are also in work-based learning across the state. And then maybe they present it to their adult services. We've had rehab counselors and providers say, wow, this is incredible seeing that resume, but having the student share it themselves, not us handing it to them, but having that student share it and talk about what their personal feelings are about that situation and what they'd like to do. So just a couple of examples that I want to share. Richard showed a vision board. This is just another vision board that another student with the help of a vocational specialist created that represented what they wanted to present and in the format that they wanted to share. It describes what they want to do for their education and their career and their relationships and living. Lots of different areas that were the focus. We also showed the work-based learning resume, and I also want to share another format. And here is one from summer work that includes the task that the student did, a quote. I think it's always important to have a quote, like a reference from an employer. The strengths, there's also the visual pictures along with the words. And then the next steps that are also in pictures that guide the student towards how they get to their goals and some things that would be helpful, and including their picture. Here's one more example with this individual who participated in a work-based learning summer work experience. And this illustrates the activities they did and their strengths as well as next steps. And what we're hearing from the people that are providing those services of how helpful these kinds of tools are for the young person to be able to share, because it helps them continue down this path of where the student wants to go and provides that information for them that often they may not have the opportunity to be able to discover these things for themselves at the adult service level. So I think when we look at this, we have some data across all of these different services that we've talked about. And we have some qualitative and some quantitative and some anecdotal evidence. And when we look at that overall, what we're seeing is an impact, that there's changes in how the youth communicate about themselves, which is, if you remember, Richard mentioned back with the self-efficacy and all of those components at the front end. This is happening as an outcome of these experiences that we're providing, not just the work experience, but taking that and compiling it into these formats where students have the tools they need to share about themselves and providing them practice in those areas. There's changes in goals for employment, not only having a goal, but what that goal is and some of the steps of how they might like to move forward in that direction. Another real important outcome has been changes in perceptions and expectations, which is at the foundation of employment first and other aspects of going to work competitively. So we're seeing this from family members, from teachers, from school personnel, from adult providers who all of a sudden are saying, wow, I didn't think this student could go to work, or I didn't think they could do this kind of work. I'm surprised. And then the ultimate outcome is that the students are getting new, different, and more opportunities. It's opening doors. They're seen as being capable and competent in ways that they weren't seen before. And now they have opportunities for more work experience, for going to employment, and opening up even more exploratory avenues for them to make more decisions. So I encourage you to get started, build that team, have that collaboration, but make it happen at your local level so that you can experience some of these changes and build the collaborative even more so as you move along. So that's all we have for today. And I want to thank our team at the Sonoran Center, and there's our website that we have some amazing people who are doing all of this good work around transition and employment. And then also to share this book, Planning the Transition to Employment, this workbook with lots of tools that has much of the information that we've shared and many of the resources. And then some of the additional ones are added to the website with this webinar. So you can access all of those. And is the acknowledgement with VCU. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you later in April for webinar number 3, focused on career outcomes, taking action together.